Natalia Cruz, a hard-working factory worker, fights to keep custody of her son from a millionaire father. In a shocking twist, her son's emotional comics reveal the truth in court, leaving the millionaire dad stunned and silent. Before we dive into the story, let's do what Sleepless in Seattle taught us. Share where you're listening from. Comment below. The alarm pierces the pre-dawn darkness like a needle through silk, muffled under the stack of unopened envelopes on Natalia's nightstand. She silences it with practiced efficiency, her movements careful and quiet in the small apartment where sound carries too easily. The bills can wait. Mateo can't. Her feet find the worn carpet, mind already mapping out the morning's choreography. Pancakes first, then Mateo's lunch, then the rush to get them both dressed and out the door before the factory whistle blows at 7. The routine is as familiar as breathing, each step measured against the steady tick of time slipping away. In the kitchen, Natalia's hands move through the familiar motions of mixing batter, muscle memory taking over while her mind drifts to the stack of bills she's been avoiding. The electric company's final notice, the rent coming due, the credit card she's been using to bridge the gaps, each one a small weight pressing down on her shoulders. But when she pours the batter into star shapes, just the way Mateo loves them, those worries recede like shadows at dawn. "Mommy?" Mateo's voice, still fuzzy with sleep, draws her attention to the kitchen doorway. He stands there in Superman pajamas that are getting too short at the ankles, his dark hair a wild tangle against the pillow crease on his cheek. "Buenos dias, mi amor." Natalia gestures to the chair she's already pulled out for him, the one that doesn't wobble. "Just in time. Your stars are almost ready." Mateo slides into his seat, immediately reaching for the syrup bottle with its sticky sides and nearly empty contents. Natalia watches him from the corner of her eye as she flips the pancakes, noting how he tries to stifle a yawn behind his hand. "Did you finish your homework last night?" He nods, then hesitates. "Well, most of it. The math was hard." Natalia slides the first batch of star-shaped pancakes onto his plate, their edges golden and slightly crispy, just how he likes them. "We can look at it together after dinner tonight, okay?" She doesn't mention that she'll have to skip her break at work to make up for coming home early enough to help him. Some calculations Mateo doesn't need to worry about. The factory's fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across the assembly line, turning everything into stark contrasts of light and shadow. Natalia's hands move steadily over the machinery, muscle memory guiding each motion while her mind wanders to Mateo's math homework. Numbers have never been her strong suit. That was always Carlos's domain, but she'll figure it out. She always does. Around her, the other workers chat about weekend plans and TV shows, their voices barely carrying over the monotonous hum of the production line. Maria from packaging talks about her daughter's quinceañera, describing elaborate decorations and custom dresses that make Natalia's chest tighten with familiar guilt. She keeps her head down, focusing on the steady rhythm of her work. Check, assemble, pack, repeat. Each completed piece is another fraction of rent, another grocery bill covered, another step toward keeping their small world intact. The afternoon light slants through dusty windows, marking time in golden inches across the factory floor. Natalia's back aches from standing, but she straightens when she sees the shift supervisor approaching. They're behind on orders this week. Overtime isn't a request anymore. It's an expectation. She thinks of Mateo waiting at after-school care, drawing his comic strips and trying not to watch the clock. Her fingers move faster over the assembly line, as if speed alone could bend time to her will. When she finally makes it home, the apartment greets her with the particular silence of a space waiting too long to be filled. Mateo's backpack sits by the door where he dropped it, comic books spilling out alongside math worksheets. She picks them up, shuffling through the pages until she finds his latest drawing. A knight in shining armor, sword raised against a dragon that looks suspiciously like an overdue bill notice. The knight has her eyes. "I got an A on it," Mateo announces from behind her, pride warming his voice. "Miss Rodriguez said my storytelling is getting really good." Natalia turns, opening her arms, and he steps into them without hesitation. He smells like crayons and the chocolate milk they serve at the after-school program. "Mi pequeño artista," she murmurs into his hair, holding him close for one more moment before reality resumes its demands. Have you started your homework? The microwave hums as it reheats yesterday's rice and beans, the plate turning in slow circles, while Mateo spreads his books across their small kitchen table. Natalia pulls up a chair beside him, ignoring the protest of her tired muscles. Tell me about your day, she says, smoothing a wrinkle from his worksheet. Mateo launches into a detailed account of recess adventures and classroom triumphs, his hands moving animatedly as he describes his teacher's praise for his comic strip. She said I could enter it in the school art show next month, he says, then falters slightly. But there's a $20 entry fee. The number hits Natalia like a physical thing, another weight added to the stack of bills waiting on her nightstand. But she keeps her voice steady, her smile genuine. We'll figure it out, she promises, the words as familiar as a prayer. Now let's look at this math. Later, after the homework is finished and dinner dishes are cleared, they settle into their bedtime routine. The children's book is worn at the corners, its spine cracked from countless readings, but Mateo still watches with rapt attention as Natalia brings the story to life. It's a tale about a small bird learning to fly, facing winds and storms, but never giving up. Natalia's voice carries the quiet strength she's learned to cultivate, the kind that doesn't announce itself but endures, like roots growing through concrete. When Mateo's breathing evens out into sleep, Natalia stays for a moment longer, studying his face in the soft glow of his nightlight. He looks so much like her at that age, the same determined set to his jaw, the same creative spark in his eyes. But there's something of Carlos there too, in the sharp line of his cheekbones and the precise way he organizes his colored pencils. Her gaze drifts to his latest drawings, pinned carefully to the wall above his desk. Among the superheroes and fantasy creatures, she notices a recurring figure, a man in a suit, tall and imposing, his face always turned away. The lines are harder here, pressed deep into the paper as if drawn with anger or fear. Natalia's throat tightens as she recognizes Carlos's silhouette, rendered through their son's eyes. In the quiet of the apartment, and surrounded by evidence of their modest but love-filled life, Natalia allows herself a moment of doubt. She thinks of Carlos's mansion in the hills, of private schools and trust funds, and all the things she can't give Mateo. But then she looks at the night drawing again, the one with her eyes, and remembers that some gifts can't be bought. She turns off Mateo's lamp and closes his door softly, leaving it open just a crack the way he likes. Tomorrow will bring its own battles, but for now, in this moment, they are safe. They are together. Sometimes, she thinks, that has to be enough. The morning brings a different kind of tension, evident in the way Mateo pushes his cereal around the bowl instead of eating it. Natalia watches him over the rim of her coffee cup, noting the slight furrow between his eyebrows that appears when something's bothering him. It's the same expression she sees in the mirror when bills are due. Mateo, she keeps her voice gentle, undemanding. ¿Qué pasa, mi amor? He sets his spoon down with deliberate care, a gesture so like Carlos it makes her heart stutter. Dad called last night, he says finally, eyes fixed on his bowl. While you were in the shower. The coffee turns bitter on Natalia's tongue. Oh? She sets her cup down slowly, careful to keep her face neutral. What did he say? He asked about my grades. Mateo's fingers trace patterns in the condensation on his glass of orange juice. He said I need to do better in math if I want to meet family standards. The phrase hits Natalia like a slap. Carlos's words exactly. She'd bet her next paycheck on it. She remembers hearing them herself years ago when her small catering business wasn't meeting family standards, when her clothes, her accent, her dreams weren't quite up to par. Mateo, look at me. She waits until he raises his eyes to hers. Your father, he wants what's best for you, but sometimes he forgets that best doesn't always mean perfect. She reaches across the table, covering his small hand with hers. You're already amazing, exactly as you are. Mateo's bottom lip trembles slightly before he catches it between his teeth, another habit picked up from Carlos, this desperate need to control any sign of weakness. But what if I fail the test today? Then you'll learn from it and do better next time. Natalia squeezes his hand. That's all anyone can ask for, including your father. She pulls his sketchbook closer, flipping through pages filled with vibrant heroes and carefully crafted stories. Look at these, mi amor. This is talent. This is creativity. This is you, putting your heart on paper. She stops at a drawing that makes her breath catch. A small boy climbing a crumbling ladder, each rung labeled with expectations. Straight as, perfect son, family name. At the top, written in Mateo's careful script, my life. The school parking lot is already filling when they arrive, parents in business suits hurrying their children toward the entrance. Natalia straightens Mateo's collar, smoothing away imaginary wrinkles. Remember what I said? He nods, attempting a smile that doesn't quite reach his eyes. Do my best and breathe. Exactly. She presses a kiss to his forehead, ignoring the way he glances around to see if anyone's watching. At 9, he's already learning to be conscious of appearances, another inheritance from Carlos she wishes she could erase. Miss Cruz, Mateo's teacher, Ms. Rodriguez, approaches with a gentle smile that doesn't quite hide her concern. Do you have a moment? Natalia checks her watch. She'll have to run to make her shift, but some things are more important than punctuality. Of course. They step aside, watching as Mateo makes his way into the building, shoulders squared against whatever the day might bring. Ms. Rodriguez turns to Natalia, her expression careful. I'm worried about Mateo, she says softly. He's been different lately, more withdrawn, and he keeps mentioning his father about failing to meet expectations. The words settle like lead in Natalia's stomach, but she keeps her voice steady. He's been feeling pressure about his grades, she explains, searching for a diplomatic way to describe Carlos's influence without sounding bitter. His father is very success-oriented. Ms. Rodriguez nods, understanding flickering across her features. Mateo's one of my brightest students, she says, but lately he seems afraid to take risks, to be creative. Yesterday he erased an entire story because he said it wasn't professional enough. She hesitates. That doesn't sound like something a 9-year-old would say on his own. Natalia's chest tightens with a familiar mix of anger and helplessness. I'll talk to him, she promises, though she's not sure what else she can say that she hasn't already tried. Thank you for letting me know. The factory feels especially oppressive today, the fluorescent lights casting everything in a sickly glow. During her lunch break, Natalia pulls out a notepad, her handwriting careful and deliberate as she composes a note to tuck into Mateo's lunchbox. Mi pequeño guerrero, she writes, remember that you're already a star in my eyes, not because of grades or expectations, but because of your beautiful heart and amazing imagination. Te amo con todo mi corazón. Mommy. She folds the note carefully, thinking of Carlos's phone calls and impossible standards. In her mind, she sees again that drawing of the crumbling ladder, of a little boy trying so hard to climb higher, higher, always higher. She remembers her own marriage to Carlos, how his pursuit of perfection had slowly suffocated any joy, any creativity, any hint of what he called weakness. Your boy's got talent, Maria says, settling beside her with her own lunch. Saw those comics he was drawing at the company picnic. Could be the next Stan Lee, that one. Natalia manages a smile, tucking the note away. If his father would let him, she murmurs, too quietly for Maria to hear. Because that's the real battle, isn't it? Not just giving Mateo the freedom to dream, but protecting those dreams from someone who sees them as frivolous distractions from real success. The afternoon drags, each hour marked by the steady rhythm of machinery and the weight of decisions yet to come. Natalia thinks of Carlos's harsh words about family standards, of Mateo's increasingly anxious attempts to meet impossible expectations. She remembers their marriage counseling sessions where Carlos had dismissed her concerns about his parenting style as coddling. Children need discipline, he'd said, his voice carrying that edge of condescension that had become so familiar. Structure. Goals. Not this endless praise for mediocrity. But Natalia sees the toll of that philosophy in Mateo's drawings, in his hesitation to share his stories, in the way he sometimes flinches when the phone rings. She made a promise when she left Carlos. Their son would not grow up believing love had to be earned through performance. The sun is setting when Natalia finally leaves work, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Her muscles ache from standing all day, but her mind is clear. She may not be able to give Mateo everything Carlos can in terms of material comfort, but she can give him something far more valuable, the freedom to be himself, imperfections and all. The apartment complex's mailboxes cast long shadows in the evening light. their metal surfaces reflecting the day's last rays like dull mirrors. Natalia approaches hers with the usual mix of hope and dread, bills and more bills, each one a small reminder of the tightrope they walk between stability and chaos. But today, wedged between a credit card statement and a grocery store flyer, there's something different, an official-looking envelope with a law firm's logo embossed in the corner. Her hands tremble slightly as she works the envelope free, its crisp edges a stark contrast to the worn bills surrounding it. The paper feels expensive, heavy with importance and implications she's not ready to face. But there's no ignoring the bold text at the top of the letter once she unfolds it. Notice of custody hearing. The words swim before her eyes, triggering a cascade of memories, their first major argument about parenting, when Mateo was barely walking. Carlos had insisted on enrolling him in an elite preschool program, dismissing Natalia's concerns about pushing too hard too soon. "He's a Vargas," Carlos had declared, his voice carrying that familiar note of absolute certainty. He needs to start building the right foundation now. Natalia had stood her ground then, arguing for a more balanced approach. "He's a baby, Carlos. He needs time to play, to explore, to just be a child." The argument had escalated, as they always did, until Carlos's words became weapons, precise and cutting. "Your problem, Natalia, is that you don't understand what it takes to succeed in this world. You're content with mediocrity." The memory fades, but the sting of those words remains, echoing in the present moment as she stares at the court summons. Carlos's determination to control every aspect of their lives had been suffocating during their marriage. Now, years later, he's making another bid for control, this time using their son as the battlefield. "Mommy?" Mateo's voice startles her. She hadn't heard him approach, too lost in her memories. Is Dad mad again?" The question breaks her heart a little, the way he automatically assumes any official document must mean trouble with his father. She quickly folds the summons and tucks it into her purse, forcing a smile she doesn't feel. "No, mi amor. Everything's fine." Mateo's dark eyes, so like her own, study her face with an intensity that reminds her he's growing too perceptive to fool completely. "You look worried," he says, shifting his backpack from one shoulder to the other. "Like when the bills come." "Just grown-up stuff," Natalia assures him, guiding him toward their apartment with a gentle hand on his shoulder. "Nothing for you to worry about. How was your test?" He brightens slightly at the change of subject, though she notices he still glances at her purse where the letter disappeared. "I think I did okay. I remembered what you said about breathing." He pauses at their door, watching as she fumbles with the keys. "I drew something for you during art class." Inside, the apartment welcomes them with familiar shadows and the lingering scent of this morning's coffee. Mateo heads straight for his backpack, pulling out a slightly crumpled piece of paper with the careful enthusiasm of someone handling treasure. "See? It's us." The drawing shows two figures standing together under a bright sun, surrounded by what looks like a garden. The taller figure, herself, she realizes, holds a shield decorated with hearts, while the smaller figure clutches a sketchbook. Both are smiling, their stick figure hands clasped together. "It's beautiful," she says, and means it. Not just for the artwork itself, but for what it reveals. Despite everything, Mateo still sees them as a team, still feels protected by her presence. The knowledge strengthens her resolve even as it threatens to break her heart. While Mateo settles at the kitchen table with his homework, Natalia retreats to the bathroom, running the faucet to mask any sound. Her hands shake as she finally pulls out the summons again, forcing herself to read every word. Carlos is seeking full custody, citing her insufficient resources and inability to provide adequate opportunities as primary reasons. The language is cold, clinical, pure Carlos in its precision and cruelty. Her reflection in the mirror above the sink looks pale, but determined. She remembers the day she left Carlos, how he'd stood in his perfectly tailored suit, looking more annoyed than heartbroken as she packed their things. "You'll never make it on your own," he'd said, not angry but matter of fact, as if stating an obvious truth. "You need me." A soft knock at the door startles her from the memory. "Mommy, can you help me with my science questions?" "Un momento, mi amor." Natalia splashes cold water on her face, tucking the summons back into her purse. Carlos was wrong then, and he's wrong now. Different kinds of wealth exist in this world, and not all of them can be measured in dollars. The kitchen table has a sprawl of textbooks and worksheets by the time she emerges. Mateo looks up, ready to explain his homework questions, but something in her expression makes him pause. "Are you sure Dad's not mad?" he asks again, softer this time. Natalia settles beside him, pulling his science book closer. "Your father." She chooses her words carefully, conscious of the fine line between honesty and burden. He wants what he thinks is best for you. Sometimes we disagree about what that means. She taps his worksheet gently. But right now, let's focus on these planets, okay? Later, after Mateo's asleep, Natalia sits at the kitchen table with her phone and the summons laid out before her. Her sister's contact information glows on the screen, a lifeline she's both desperate and hesitant to grasp. Sophia has her own family to worry about, her own struggles to navigate. But as Natalia stares at the legal document that threatens everything she's built, she knows she can't fight this battle alone. She presses the call button before she can talk herself out of it. Sophia answers on the third ring, her voice warm despite the late hour. "Nadi, everything okay?" The familiar nickname nearly undoes her composure. "Carlos," she manages, her voice barely above a whisper to avoid waking Mateo. "He's suing for custody." The silence that follows speaks volumes. When Sophia finally responds, her voice carries the steel that comes from watching her sister's marriage crumble firsthand. "Hijo de puta," she mutters, then quickly adds, "Sorry, God, Nadi, how are you holding up?" "I don't know." Natalia's fingers trace the embossed letterhead on the summons. "He has so much money, Sophia. The best lawyers, the best schools, everything I can't give Mateo." "Stop." Sophia's tone brooks no argument. "You give that boy something worth more than all of Carlos's money. Love. Real love, not that conditional crap Carlos calls parenting." A pause, then softer. "Remember what Mommy always said? El amor verdadero no tiene precio. True love has no price." Their mother's words, spoken so often during their childhood in a much smaller, much poorer apartment than even this one. But will the court see it that way? They'll see a mother who works her ass off to give her son a good life. Sophia insists, who supports his dreams instead of trying to force him into some corporate mold before he's even hit puberty? Another pause. "Have you thought about legal aid? There are organizations that help with cases like this." Natalia nods, though her sister can't see it. "I'll start researching tomorrow. I needed to tell someone who remembers how he was, what living with him did to me." "To both of you," Sophia corrects gently. "I saw how Mateo changed when you were married, Nady. How quiet he got, how careful, and I've seen him bloom since you left." She sighs softly. "Fight this with everything you've got, Hermana. That boy needs his mother." After they hang up, Natalia sits in the quiet kitchen for a long time, listening to the familiar sounds of their apartment building settling for the night. From Mateo's room comes the soft whir of his favorite fan, the one that helps him sleep. Such a small thing, knowing these details about her son, what helps him rest, what makes him feel safe, what makes his eyes light up with joy. Can Carlos say the same? Does he even want to? She stands, moving to Mateo's doorway with silent steps. In sleep, his face is peaceful, free from the anxiety that increasingly shadows his waking hours. His latest comic strip lies open on his desk, partially completed, a story about a young wizard learning to believe in his own magic. The dialogue bubble above the character reads, "Maybe I'm stronger than I think." Natalia touches the page gently, careful not to smudge the pencil marks. Yes, she thinks. Maybe we both are. The kitchen table becomes her war room as midnight approaches. The court documents spread before her like battle plans. Each paragraph of legal jargon hits like a fresh wound. Insufficient financial resources, limited educational opportunities, substandard living conditions. Carlos's words dressed up in lawyer's language, but she recognizes the precision of the attack. He always did know exactly where to strike. The numbers blur together as she attempts to make sense of her options. Legal aid seems like a distant hope. She's seen the waiting lists, the overwhelmed clinics trying to serve too many with too little. Her bank statement mocks her with its meager balance, barely enough to cover next month's rent, let alone a lawyer's retainer. A floorboard creaks behind her, and she turns to find Mateo padding into the kitchen, his Spider-Man pajamas rumpled from sleep. "You're supposed to be in bed, mi amor." she says softly, but he's already settling into the chair beside her, his sketchbook clutched to his chest like armor. I couldn't sleep, he admits, then pushes the sketchbook toward her. I want to show you something. Natalia sets aside the court papers, giving him her full attention as he flips through pages until he finds what he's looking for. The drawing takes up 2 full pages, more detailed than his usual work. It shows their apartment, but not as others might see it. Not the cramped spaces or worn furniture that Carlos's lawyers will surely photograph and document. Instead, Mateo has captured the heart of their home. The kitchen wall, covered in his artwork. The window box, where they're growing herbs together. The corner where they sit and read stories. Every inch radiates warmth and love, colored in the soft yellows and blues that Mateo uses when he's drawing something that makes him happy. At the bottom, in his careful handwriting, he's written, home. See? He points to little details she might have missed. The cookie jar they painted together, the blanket fort they built last weekend, the calendar where they mark off days until school breaks. This is where I want to stay, Mommy. The simple declaration catches in her chest like a physical thing. Mateo, I heard you talking to Tia Sofia, he continues, his voice small but steady, about Dad wanting me to live with him. His fingers trace the edges of his drawing. But this is home, with you. Natalia pulls him close, breathing in the familiar scent of his shampoo and the slight staleness of sleep. Her mind races through all the things she should say about how complicated adult matters can be, about how they need to be practical, about how sometimes want isn't enough against the hard realities of the world. Instead, she looks at his drawing again, really looks at it. In Mateo's careful lines and chosen colors, she sees what Carlos never could, that wealth isn't always measured in square footage or bank balances, that a home isn't defined by its address, but by the love it contains. She rises, crossing to the cluttered desk where she keeps important papers. Her hand finds the business card she picked up at the community center last week, a nonprofit legal aid organization specializing in family law. She'd dismissed it then, too proud or too scared to admit she needed help. Now, looking at Mateo's drawing of their home, she realizes that pride has no place in this fight. The next hours pass in a blur of note-taking and list-making. She documents everything. Their daily routines, Mateo's academic progress, his art classes at the community center, the network of neighbors who help watch him when she works late. Each detail becomes ammunition, proof that what they have here, though modest, is worth fighting for. Mateo eventually falls asleep at the table, his cheek pressed against his sketchbook. Natalia carries him back to bed, her arms straining slightly. He's getting so big, so quickly. As she tucks him in, she allows herself to really study his face, to memorize the peaceful curve of his cheek, the slight furrow between his brows that appears even in sleep. Te prometo, she whispers, smoothing his hair back from his forehead. I promise you, mi amor, this is your home, and I will fight for it. Morning brings the harsh fluorescent lights of the courthouse, their artificial glare washing out the warm browns of Mateo's skin as he clutches Natalia's hand. The marble floors echo with clicking heels and murmured conversations, each sound amplified by the cavernous ceiling. Natalia straightens her shoulders, conscious of the gap between her carefully pressed department store blazer and the designer suits that glide past them. Carlos enters like he owns the building, which, given his company's real estate holdings, he might actually help finance. His suit probably costs more than 3 months of Natalia's rent, each crease and angle calculated to project authority. The lawyer at his side matches his polished appearance, her heels clicking against marble with military precision. Mateo's hand tightens in Natalia's as Carlos approaches. He doesn't run to his father, doesn't offer the greeting Carlos clearly expects. Instead, he shifts slightly behind Natalia, using her body as a shield in a way that makes her heart ache. You're looking well, Natalia, Carlos says, his tone carrying that familiar note of condescension masked as courtesy. His eyes flick over her outfit, cataloging every imperfection. Though I'm surprised you brought Mateo. These proceedings aren't really appropriate for children. Before Natalia can respond, her lawyer appears. Young, rumpled, but with fire in his eyes that reminds her of herself at Mateo's age. The legal aid office warned her he was fresh out of school, but his passion for family law and his immediate understanding of their situation had won her trust. Mr. Vargas, he greets Carlos, extending his hand with more confidence than his wrinkled suit suggests. I'm David Martinez, representing Miss Cruz. And actually, Mateo's presence was specifically requested by the court to establish a baseline understanding of the current family dynamic. The subtle emphasis on family doesn't escape Carlos's notice. His smile tightens at the corners. Of course. Shall we? The courtroom feels smaller than Natalia expected, more cramped than the dramatic spaces she's seen on TV. She sits beside David, their table a mirror of Carlos's more polished setup across the aisle. Mateo sits behind them with Sofia, who took the morning off work to provide support. Carlos's lawyer rises first, her movements as precise as a dancer's. Your Honor, our petition is quite straightforward. Mr. Vargas is seeking full custody of his son, Mateo, based on his superior ability to provide for the child's educational and material needs. She gestures to a stack of glossy photographs. As you can see from these images, the current living situation with Ms. Cruz is inadequate. The photos appear on a screen, their apartment buildings peeling paint, the narrow bedroom Mateo calls his art studio, the ancient car Natalia drives him to school in. Each image carefully framed to emphasize what's lacking rather than what's present. Mr. Vargas can offer Mateo enrollment at Westbrook Academy, the lawyer continues, naming a private school that costs more than Natalia makes in a year, along with private tutoring, cultural enrichment opportunities, and a stable environment conducive to academic excellence. David stands, his cheap suit looking even shabbier under the fluorescent lights, but his voice rings with conviction. Your Honor, what opposing counsel fails to mention is that Mateo is already excelling, both academically and artistically, under his mother's care. He holds up Mateo's latest report card, his art show ribbons, the glowing letters from his teachers. Miss Cruz has created a nurturing environment that supports both his education and his emotional well-being. The judge, an older woman with steel gray hair and alert eyes, studies both presentations carefully. I see a lot of discussion about material resources, she notes, her gaze moving between Carlos and Natalia. But I'm more interested in the child's emotional welfare. Mr. Martinez, you mentioned Mateo's artistic pursuits? Yes, Your Honor. David gestures to their evidence folders. Mateo has shown remarkable talent in visual arts, particularly in creating comic books and sequential art. Under Ms. Cruz's encouragement, he's developed this skill into both a creative outlet and a potential career interest. Carlos's lawyer interjects smoothly. While creative hobbies are charming, Your Honor, Mr. Vargas is more concerned with providing a foundation for real success. The Vargas family has a legacy of business excellence. A legacy, David cuts in, that seems to prioritize status over emotional well-being. He pulls out Mateo's drawing of the crumbling ladder. This is how Mateo currently visualizes his relationship with his father's expectations. The judge studies the drawing for a long moment, her expression thoughtful. I'm ordering a full investigation before proceeding with any custody changes, she announces finally, including home visits, psychological evaluations, and interviews with Mateo's teachers and care providers. She fixes both parents with a stern look. This court's primary concern is the child's best interest, not just financially, but emotionally and developmentally. Outside the courtroom, Carlos catches up to Natalia while David is discussing next steps with Sofia. You're fighting a losing battle, he says quietly, his voice pitched too low for Mateo to hear. You know that, right? Money always wins in the end. Natalia meets his gaze steadily, thinking of Mateo's drawing of their home, of his quiet plea to stay where he feels safe and loved. No, Carlos, she replies, her voice firm. Love wins. You just never learned the difference. She turns away before he can respond, walking back to where Mateo waits with Sofia. Her son's face lights up as she approaches, and she pulls him close, breathing in the familiar scent of his shampoo and graphite pencils. The battle isn't over. It's barely begun. But looking down at Mateo's relieved smile, Natalia knows with bone-deep certainty that some things are worth any fight. The afternoon sun slants through the courthouse windows, painting their small family in warm light as they head home together, ready to face whatever comes next. The community center's fluorescent lights flicker overhead as Natalia shifts in the hard plastic chair, her factory-worn hands smoothing invisible wrinkles from her cleanest work shirt. Across the table, Rosa Alvarez drums her fingers against a styrofoam coffee cup, her lunch break ticking away. Por favor, Rosa. Natalia hates the desperation that creeps into her voice. You've seen how hard I work, how I always make time for Mateo despite everything. Aye, Natalia. Rosa's weathered face softens. You don't have to convince me. I've watched you skip lunch breaks to check on that boy, seen you running yourself ragged between shifts. She reaches across the table, her calloused fingers closing over Natalia's. Of course, I'll testify. That pendejo Carlos needs to understand money isn't everything. Relief loosens the knot in Natalia's chest, but only slightly. One witness down, so many more to go. The legal aid lawyer's words echo in her mind. Character witnesses can make or break a custody case. She glances at her watch, 45 minutes until her shift starts, just enough time for one more stop. The elevator in Natalia's apartment building is broken again, forcing her to climb 5 flights of stairs to reach Mr. Gonzalez's floor. The old man answers on her third knock, his roomy eyes brightening with recognition. Senora Cruz, and how is my young artist today? At school, Natalia says, managing a tired smile. Mr. Gonzalez, I need to ask you something important. He ushers her inside, the apartment smelling of coffee and yesterday's tamales. Family photos crowd every surface. Children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, all beaming at the camera. Natalia's throat tightens, thinking of the sparse walls in Carlos's mansion, decorated with abstract art that costs more than her yearly salary but tells no stories. You know I see everything from my window. Mr. Gonzalez says as he settles into his worn armchair. How you help me with groceries, even when you're dead tired from work. How Mateo always has a new drawing for me. Such talent in those little hands. His expression hardens. And I remember that husband of yours, how he used to look at this building like it was beneath him. Never once offered to help an old man up the stairs. Natalia explains about the custody battle, about needing witnesses to testify to her character. Mr. Gonzalez listens, nodding slowly, his arthritic fingers wrapped around a coffee cup that reads World's Best Grandpa. You tell me when and where, he says finally. I'll show them what real family values look like. The relief is short-lived. That evening, Natalia's phone buzzes with a text from her lawyer. Carlos hired PI, looking into your finances. Call me. Her hands shake as she dials, moving to the bathroom so Mateo won't overhear. The lawyer's voice is tight with concern. They found the payday loan from 3 years ago. They're going to use it to paint you as financially irresponsible. The memory hits hard. Mateo's appendicitis, the hospital bills piling up, her health insurance refusing to cover everything. The loan had seemed like her only option, the interest rate a problem for future Natalia to solve. I paid it back, she whispers, though her voice sounds hollow even to her own ears. Every cent. I know. But they'll spin it their way. We need to be prepared. After hanging up, Natalia finds Mateo at the kitchen table, homework spread before him untouched. His pencil moves across a blank page, but instead of math problems, he's drawing dark, angular shapes that loom over a small figure. Mi amor? She keeps her voice gentle. Your math homework. I'm not hungry, he says quickly, though she hasn't mentioned dinner. His pencil moves faster, pressing harder into the paper. The looming shapes take on familiar contours, a suit, a tie, a stern expression she knows too well. Natalia's heart clenches as she recognizes Carlos's silhouette in her son's art. The figure towers over a much smaller one labeled simply Me in Mateo's careful handwriting. Above them both, block letters spell out expectations, like storm clouds gathering. She wants to gather him close, to promise everything will be okay. But Mateo's shoulders are rigid with tension, his movements sharp and defensive. Instead, she settles into the chair beside him, pulling her own notepad closer. Tell me about your drawing, she says softly. Mateo's pencil stills. Dad says I need to focus more on important things, like math. His voice drops to barely a whisper. He says drawing is just a distraction. The words hit Natalia like a physical blow, remembering how Carlos had dismissed her catering business dreams with similar contempt. She studies her son's artwork more carefully now, noting the heavy shadows, the way the smaller figure seems to be shrinking into itself. Your art is important, she says firmly. It's part of who you are, mi amor. No one can take that away. Mateo doesn't respond, but his next pencil stroke is lighter, adding a small shield to the drawing's protagonist. In careful letters, he labels it, Mommy's Love. The preliminary hearing arrives too quickly and not soon enough. The courthouse looms before them, all marble and authority, as Natalia guides Mateo through the metal detectors. Her department store blazer feels thin compared to the designer suits that brush past them, but she keeps her spine straight, her chin lifted. Carlos's lawyer strikes first, her heels clicking against hardwood as she approaches the bench. Your Honor, we've prepared a comprehensive documentation of Ms. Cruz's work schedule. Photos appear on the courtroom's display screen. Natalia leaving for her shift in pre-dawn darkness, returning long after sunset. As you can see, Mateo spends significant time without parental supervision. The images sting, each one a moment stolen from her son. But Natalia watches the judge's face, seeing something like recognition in the older woman's eyes. Another working mother, perhaps, who understands the impossible math of bills versus time. Rosa takes the stand next, her factory uniform crisp despite the early hour. I've worked with Natalia for 5 years, she says, her accent thick but her voice clear. She uses every break to call Mateo, check his homework, make sure he's okay. Some days she doesn't eat lunch at all, just to have those extra minutes with him. Carlos shifts in his expensive suit, a flash of annoyance crossing his features. His lawyer stands to cross-examine, her smile sharp. And these calls, these rushed check-ins, you consider this adequate parental supervision? I consider it love, Rosa replies simply, the kind that sacrifices everything for a child's happiness. The judge makes notes, her expression neutral. While Miss Cruz's dedication is admirable, she says finally, the court must consider all aspects of stability, including financial resources. Her gaze moves between Natalia and Carlos. Mr. Vargas's ability to provide educational opportunities and material security cannot be ignored. Natalia feels the words like weights on her shoulders, but she doesn't slump. Can't slump, not with Mateo watching. As they leave the courtroom, she catches Carlos's reflection in the polished marble walls. His smile satisfied, victorious, but then Mateo's hand slips into hers, warm and trusting, and she remembers the shield in his drawing. Some victories can't be measured in dollar signs. The weekend arrives like a sentence. Natalia helps Mateo pack his overnight bag, her movements mechanical as she folds his favorite pajamas, tucks his sketchbook between layers of clothing. The mansion's address sits heavy in her phone's GPS, each mile marker bringing them closer to Carlos's world of manicured lawns and invisible servants. Remember, she tells Mateo as they pull up to the gate, you can call me anytime, for anything. He nods, clutching his backpack like armor. The gates swing open silently, revealing a circular drive where a uniformed staff member already waits. Natalia watches as Mateo is led inside, his small figure disappearing into the mansion's shadows. The weekend crawls by. Natalia fills it with extra shifts, trying to ignore how quiet the apartment feels without Mateo's presence. On Sunday evening, she arrives at the mansion 10 minutes early, her hands gripping the steering wheel to keep from fidgeting. Mateo emerges exactly on schedule, his movements stiff and controlled in a way that sets off alarm bells in Natalia's mind. He doesn't speak until they're halfway home. They had a whole schedule, he says finally, his voice small. Every hour was planned. Natalia glances in the rearview mirror, noting the shadows under her son's eyes. Tell me? Piano lessons first thing Saturday, then tutoring. Dad says my math needs work. Then etiquette training, then... His voice catches. I tried to show Dad my new comic, but he said we didn't have time for distractions. The word hangs between them, sharp as broken glass. At a red light, Natalia turns to fully face her son. Did you bring your sketchbook? Mateo nods, pulling it from his backpack. She recognizes the new drawing immediately, a towering structure of cold gray stone, its windows like vacant eyes. Inside, a small figure stands alone, surrounded by clocks and schedules and textbooks. The caption reads simply, "No escape." Something fierce and protective rises in Natalia's chest. She thinks of her own marriage to Carlos, how his need for control had slowly suffocated every spark of joy until she could hardly breathe. Never again. Not with Mateo. The pressure mounts as weeks pass. Carlos schedules additional bonding time that feels more like performance reviews, each visit leaving Mateo more withdrawn. During their court-mandated meetings, he critiques everything from Mateo's posture to his vocabulary, each correction delivered with surgical precision. "Your grades are acceptable," he says during one visit, studying Mateo's report card like a disappointing business proposal. "But acceptable isn't excellent. A Vargas must strive for excellence." Mateo's hands disappear under the table, and Natalia knows he's fighting the urge to reach for his sketchbook. Later, she finds a new series of drawings hidden between his math worksheets. A small warrior facing an enormous dragon that breathes fire, made of report cards and test scores. But in the final panel, something changes. The warrior raises a shield that glows with warm colors, reds and golds that radiate from a heart-shaped center. Natalia traces the shield with trembling fingers, recognizing the love and trust her son has placed in her protection. Tears blur her vision, but she blinks them away quickly. This isn't the time for crying. This is the time for fighting. Carlos's accusations come next, each one calculated to wound. "You're poisoning him against me," he says during a heated exchange outside the courtroom, filling his head with artistic nonsense instead of practical skills. "I'm letting him be himself," Natalia responds, her voice level despite the anger burning in her chest. "Something you never allowed either of us." The words hit their mark. Carlos's mask slips for just a moment, revealing something raw and wounded underneath. But then it's gone, replaced by his usual cold efficiency. "We'll see what the court thinks about your permissive parenting." That evening, Natalia spreads Mateo's recent drawings across their kitchen table after he's asleep. Each one tells a story of pressure, of fear, of a child trying desperately to meet impossible standards. But they also show something else: resilience, creativity, and most importantly, hope. In every drawing, no matter how dark the scene, there's always that heart-shaped shield, glowing with protective light. She begins gathering them carefully, organizing them into a portfolio. These aren't just drawings anymore, they're evidence. Evidence of emotional harm, of psychological pressure, of a father's inability to see his son as anything but an extension of his own ambitions. The moon rises over their small apartment, casting silver light across the kitchen table where Mateo's art tells its truth in lines and shadows. Tomorrow will bring more battles, more accusations, more attempts to prove her unworthy. But tonight, looking at her son's visual testimony of their struggle, Natalia feels something solidify in her chest. Some fights aren't won with money or power. Some fights are won with love, with understanding, with the courage to let a child be exactly who they are. And those are the battles Natalia knows how to win. The fluorescent lights of the courtroom cast harsh shadows across Mateo's comic strips as Mr. Ramirez arranges them before Judge Henderson. Natalia's hands clench in her lap, her nails leaving half-moon impressions in her palms. The courtroom's silence weighs heavy, broken only by the soft shuffle of paper, as her lawyer places each drawing with deliberate care. "Your Honor," Mr. Ramirez begins, his voice steady despite his wrinkled suit, "these drawings represent more than a child's imagination. They tell the story of a boy drowning under the weight of impossible expectations." He lifts one strip, the paper trembling slightly. Note this recurring image, a small figure crushed beneath an oversized clock labeled schedules. Carlos's lawyer, Miss Patterson, rises from her seat, her movements precise as a surgeon's. "Your Honor, while these drawings are charming, they hardly constitute evidence. Children are naturally dramatic in their artistic expressions." "If I may," Mr. Ramirez counters, pulling another strip from the collection, "this sequence shows a pattern of emotional distress, the recurring motif of towers casting shadows, of figures looming over a small child. These aren't random doodles. They're cries for help." Judge Henderson leans forward, her steel-rimmed glasses catching the light. "I'd like to examine these more closely." Her words send a ripple through the courtroom. Carlos shifts in his seat, his perfectly pressed suit rustling with the movement. The judge studies each strip, her expression unreadable. Minutes stretch like hours until she finally looks up, her gaze settling on Mateo. "I think we need to hear from the artist himself." She turns to the bailiff. "Please call Mateo Cruz to the stand." Natalia's breath catches. They'd prepared for this possibility, but seeing Mateo rise from his seat behind her makes her heart stutter. He clutches his folder of comics like a shield, his small frame swimming in the suit they'd borrowed from a neighbor's son. The walk to the witness stand seems endless, each step echoing against marble floors that cost more than their yearly rent. Mateo's eyes find hers as he settles into the oversized chair. She tries to smile, to pour all her love and strength into that single look. The court reporter steps forward, adjusting the microphone, and Mateo flinches at the screech of feedback. "Please state your name for the record," Judge Henderson says, her tone gentler than before. "Mateo Alexander Cruz." His voice comes out barely above a whisper, but the microphone carries it through the courtroom. Carlos leans forward, his expression a careful mask of paternal concern that doesn't quite reach his eyes. Mr. Ramirez approaches the stand, moving slowly to avoid startling Mateo. "Can you tell us about your drawings, Mateo? Specifically, this one here." He holds up the comic strip with the looming clock. Mateo's fingers twist in his lap. That's about Dad's schedules." He swallows hard. "When I stay at his house, everything has to be exactly on time. Piano practice from 4 to 5:30, homework until 7. If I'm even a minute late," his voice trails off. "And what happens if you're late?" Mr. Ramirez prompts gently. "Objection," Miss Patterson cuts in, leading the witness. "I'll rephrase," Mr. Ramirez says smoothly. "Mateo, can you explain what the clock represents in your drawing?" Mateo's eyes dart to Carlos before returning to the comic. "It's like being crushed. Like there's this huge weight always pressing down, telling me I'm too slow, not good enough, not working hard enough." His words come faster now, tumbling out like water through a broken dam. "Sometimes I feel like a robot, just following orders. Dad says it's for my own good that I need discipline to succeed, but..." "But what?" Mr. Ramirez encourages when Mateo falls silent. "But I don't feel like me anymore when I'm there." Mateo's voice cracks. "I can't draw, can't read what I want. Everything has to be educational or productive." He pulls another comic from his folder with trembling hands. "That's why I drew this one." The image projects onto the courtroom screen, a small boy transforming into a wind-up toy, his heart replaced by gears and springs. In the background, a towering figure holds a key labeled Excellence. Carlos's jaw tightens, a muscle jumping beneath his perfectly smooth skin. His lawyer scribbles furiously on her legal pad, but Natalia barely notices. Her attention stays fixed on Mateo, on the way his shoulders curve inward under the weight of his testimony. "Can you tell us about this other character that appears in many of your comics?" Mr. Ramirez asks, indicating a recurring figure Natalia recognizes instantly, the fire-breathing dragon in an expensive suit. Mateo's grip on his folder tightens. That's how Dad looks when I disappoint him." The words come out barely above a whisper. "When my grades aren't perfect, or when I mess up at piano recitals, or..." He takes a shaky breath. "When he finds me drawing instead of studying." A murmur ripples through the courtroom. Carlos's carefully maintained facade cracks for just a moment, revealing a flash of anger that validates every word of Mateo's testimony. "And this figure here?" Mr. Ramirez points to another character, a knight with a glowing heart instead of armor. For the first time since taking the stand, Mateo's face brightens. "That's Mom." His voice grows stronger. "See the heart? That's because she loves me no matter what, even when I get B's or mess up or just want to draw all day." He looks directly at Natalia now, his eyes shining. "She doesn't try to make me be someone else. She lets me be me." The silence that follows feels electric. Even Miss Patterson seems momentarily at a loss for words. Judge Henderson studies Mateo over her glasses, her expression thoughtful. "Mateo," she says finally, "do you love your father?" "Yes," Mateo answers without hesitation, though his voice wavers. "But," he glances at Carlos, then back to his drawings, "but I'm scared of disappointing him. With Mom, I'm just scared of losing her." The distinction hangs in the air like a thunderclap. Carlos's composure finally breaks, his face flushing with a mixture of anger and something that might be shame. Miss Patterson touches his arm in warning, but he shrugs her off. "This is ridiculous," he snaps, rising halfway from his seat. "I've given him everything, the best schools, the best opportunities, and you're telling me I'm the villain because I want him to succeed?" "Mr. Vargas," Judge Henderson's voice cuts through the tension like a blade. "You will remain silent or be held in contempt." She turns back to Mateo, who has shrunk further into the witness stand. Thank you for your honesty, young man. You may step down. Mateo practically runs back to Natalia's side, pressing against her as if trying to disappear. She wraps an arm around him, feeling his heart racing through his borrowed suit jacket. In light of this testimony, Judge Henderson continues, I'm ordering full psychological evaluations for all parties involved. This court's primary concern is the child's emotional well-being, not just his material comfort. She fixes Carlos with a stern look. Mr. Vargas, while your ability to provide financially is not in question, these drawings and Mateo's testimony raise serious concerns about the emotional impact of your parenting style. Outside the courtroom, reporters cluster like hungry wolves, their cameras flashing. Whispers follow Carlos as he strides past them, his lawyer struggling to keep pace. Natalia catches fragments of conversation. CEO's parenting style questioned, emotional neglect allegations, child's artwork reveals trauma. Miss Cruz, a reporter breaks from the pack. How do you respond to allegations that you're using your son's art to manipulate the court? Before Natalia can answer, Sophia appears at her side, creating a barrier between them and the press. No comments, she says firmly, guiding them toward the exit. My sister and nephew have been through enough today. That evening, in their small apartment, Natalia sits with Mateo on their worn couch. His head rests against her shoulder as they look through his latest comic strip, a work in progress showing the knight and the small boy building a fortress of art supplies to keep the dragon at bay. You were so brave today, mi amor, she murmurs, running her fingers through his hair. I know how hard that was. Do you think Dad hates me now? His voice sounds small, younger than his 9 years. No, mi vida. Natalia chooses her words carefully. I think your father is learning that love isn't just about providing things. It's about accepting people for who they are. Mateo adds another detail to his drawing, a tiny smile on the boy's face as he creates art within the fortress walls. Mom? What happens now? Natalia looks at the court summons still sitting on their kitchen counter, at the business card for the psychologist they'll need to see. She thinks of Carlos's face when Mateo described his fear of disappointment, of the crack in his perfect facade that might, just might, lead to real change. Now, she says, pulling Mateo closer, we keep fighting, but we fight with truth, with love, and with your amazing art. She taps the comic strip. Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is just be ourselves. Outside their window, the city settles into evening, its lights twinkling like stars against the darkening sky. In the distance, the high-rise where Carlos's office sits gleams like a tower from Mateo's drawings. But here, in their small apartment filled with art and love and the courage to be authentic, Natalia feels like they've already won something precious, the freedom to be themselves, imperfections and all. The psychological evaluations loom ahead, and she knows Carlos won't give up easily. His resources are still vast, his influence far-reaching. But watching Mateo add color to his knight's glowing heart, Natalia understands that some battles aren't won with money or power, but with the simple truth spoken from a child's heart. She pulls out her phone, sending a quick text to Mr. Ramirez about tomorrow's preparation for the psychological evaluations. They'll need to be ready for Carlos's next move, whatever it might be. But for now, she lets herself enjoy this moment of victory, small but significant, like the first ray of dawn breaking through storm clouds. Can we have hot chocolate? Mateo asks, adding the finishing touches to his comic. To celebrate being brave? Natalia smiles, already heading for the kitchen. Of course, mi amor, with extra marshmallows. You've earned them. The microwave hums as she heats the milk, its soft drone a counterpoint to the sound of Mateo's pencil scratching against paper. Through the kitchen window, she catches her reflection, tired but standing tall, a real-life version of the knight in Mateo's drawings. Not perfect, not wealthy, but strong enough to fight for what matters most, the right to love her son exactly as he is. Tomorrow will bring new challenges, but tonight they celebrate truth, courage, and the power of a child's art to speak what words alone cannot say. The battle isn't over, but for the first time since receiving that court summons, Natalia feels truly confident in their victory. Not because they have the most money or the best lawyers, but because they have something far more powerful, the unshakable bond between a mother and son, illustrated in comic strips and sealed with unconditional love. The next morning's newspapers blast headlines across their business sections. Vargas CEO's parenting style raises questions about leadership. Child's comics expose corporate culture of control. Emotional intelligence in the C-suite. What makes a modern leader? Carlos's carefully cultivated image cracks further with each publication. Natalia's phone buzzes with a text from Mr. Ramirez. The psychological evaluations have been scheduled for next week. Dr. Sarah Chen, a respected child psychologist, will conduct separate sessions with each of them, followed by observation of parent-child interactions. The message ends with a warning. Carlos's team is already trying to control the narrative. Be prepared for more aggressive tactics. She deletes a voicemail from Carlos without listening to it. Through the kitchen window, she spots a sleek black car idling across the street, one of Carlos's private investigators, no doubt, watching their comings and goings. His empire might be showing cracks, but he's far from defeated. Ready for school? She calls to Mateo, who emerges from his room with his backpack and a fresh comic strip in hand. Almost. He adds one final detail to his drawing. The knight now wears a crown made of paintbrushes and pencils, while the dragon's business suit shows signs of wear. Do you think the evaluations will be scary? Natalia kneels beside him, straightening his collar. Just be honest, mi amor. Like you were in court. Your truth is stronger than any story they try to tell about us. As they step outside, the black car pulls away, but Natalia walks tall. Let them watch. Let them report back to Carlos about their modest apartment, their hand-me-down clothes, their lives that don't meet his exacting standards. They can't photograph what matters most, the love that flows through Mateo's art, the strength that grows in the spaces between his careful lines. The psychological evaluations loom ahead, but Natalia faces them with newfound confidence. Carlos's wealth bought him the finest lawyers, but it couldn't buy what the court saw in those comic strips, the unvarnished truth of a child's heart, speaking through art what words alone could never express. The fluorescent lights of the factory buzz overhead as Natalia's fingers move through the familiar motions of assembly, her mind elsewhere. The overtime shift stretches before her like a desert, but each extra hour means another few dollars toward making their apartment feel more like the home Mateo deserves. More than that, like the home they'll need to prove they already have. You're here late again, Maria says from the next station over, her voice carrying a mix of concern and understanding. She's been at the factory longer than most, her silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun that never seems to loosen, no matter how long the shift. Third time this week. Natalia manages a tired smile, her hands never stopping their rhythmic movement across the conveyor belt. Extra shifts mean extra paint for Mateo's room. She doesn't mention the legal fees that lurk behind every financial decision now, the way each dollar feels like ammunition in a war she never wanted to fight. The production line hums steadily, a mechanical heartbeat that's become as familiar as her own. Around them, other workers move through their tasks with practiced efficiency, but Natalia notices the sidelong glances, the whispered conversations that pause when she passes. News of the custody battle has spread through the factory floor like oil through water, leaving ripples of sympathy and speculation in its wake. Listen, Maria says, lowering her voice. Some of us were talking about your situation. She hesitates, fingers faltering slightly over her work. Rosa had an idea about organizing something to help with the legal fees. Natalia's hands still for a fraction of a second before muscle memory takes over again. Pride wars with necessity in her chest, but she thinks of Mateo's face this morning, of the dark circles under his eyes that matched her own. What kind of something? A fundraiser. Nothing fancy, just the factory workers pulling together. Rosa's cousin works at the union hall. We could use the space for free. Maria's voice grows stronger as she continues. Plus, Mr. Gonzalez from your building, he wants to write a letter about what a good mother you are. Says he's seen how you are with Mateo, how you never miss a rent payment even when times are tight. The conveyor belt moves relentlessly forward, but something in Natalia's chest loosens slightly. She thinks of all the times Mr. Gonzalez has watched Mateo after school when her shift ran late, of how he always saves the Sunday comics for her son. I don't know what to say. Say yes, Maria replies simply. Let us help. God knows we've all needed it at some point. Before Natalia can respond, a shadow falls across their workstation. The shift supervisor, Janet, stands there with an expression that tries for neutral but lands somewhere closer to concerned. Natalia, there's someone here to see you. From the court, the word sends a ripple through the nearby workers. Natalia carefully sets down her tools, conscious of how her hands want to shake. Now? Janet nods, gesturing toward the break room. They said it's important. Something about home evaluation procedures. The break room's harsh lighting makes everything look slightly unreal, from the aging vending machines to the court official's crisp blazer. The woman introduces herself as Miss Chen from Family Services, her clipboard already covered in neat notes. We'll need to schedule a home visit, Miss Chen explains, her tone professional but not unkind. The judge wants a thorough evaluation of both living environments before proceeding further. Natalia thinks of their apartment, clean but worn, loved but showing its age. She thinks of the half-finished painting project in Mateo's room, of the furniture she's been slowly replacing piece by piece with her overtime earnings. When? Next week. We'll need to see your son's living space, his study area, general home conditions. Miss Chen's pen moves across her clipboard. We'll also be visiting Mr. Vargas's residence for comparison. The word comparison hits like a physical blow. Natalia imagines Carlos's mansion with its manicured lawns and professional cleaning service, its dedicated study rooms and climate-controlled art storage. How do you compare love to square footage, dedication to dollar signs? I understand, Natalia says, because what else can she say? She accepts the official notice, tucking it carefully into her locker before returning to the production line. The rest of her shift passes in a blur of mechanical movements and mental calculations. By the time she clocks out, her back aches from standing, but her resolve has hardened into something like steel. She may not be able to match Carlos's wealth, but she can show them a home built on love and sacrifice, on determination and hope. Home improvement stores are different at night. The fluorescent lights cast everything in a harsh commercial glow, but Natalia moves through the aisles with purpose. Paint samples fan out in her hands like playing cards, warm yellows and soft blues by colors that will make Mateo's room feel like the creative sanctuary he deserves. She thinks of his latest drawings, how he uses color to express emotion, and selects shades that speak of safety and possibility. Can I help you find anything? A young employee approaches, his name tag reading Derek. Natalia holds up the paint samples. I'm redoing my son's room. Something bright, but not. She searches for the right words. Not overwhelming. Derek nods, leading her toward the paint mixing station. These are good choices, cheerful but calm. He starts entering codes into the computer. How many gallons were you thinking? Natalia calculates quickly. Walls, ceiling, maybe enough left over for touch-ups. 2 should do it. She doesn't mention that she's spread the cost across 3 different credit cards, each one stretched nearly to its limit. While the paint mixes, she wanders to the furniture section, running her hands over solid wood desks and sturdy bookshelves. Each price tag makes her wince, but she takes pictures with her phone, adding them to her mental timeline of improvements. 1 piece at a time, 1 extra shift at a time. The apartment is quiet when she finally returns home, but light spills from under Mateo's door. She finds him at his desk, colored pencils scattered around him like fallen leaves, working on what looks like a new comic strip. Mijo, she says softly, it's late. He looks up, dark circles under his eyes, making him look older than his 9 years. I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the hearing tomorrow. Natalia sets down her shopping bags and moves to his side, studying the drawing in progress. It shows 2 figures, one tall and imposing in a business suit, the other smaller but standing firm, wielding what looks like a shield made of light. Is that us? She asks, though she already knows the answer. Mateo nods, adding another layer of shadow to the businessman's face. Dad's lawyer kept saying all these things about our home, about how it's not good enough. His pencil moves with more force now, nearly tearing the paper. But they don't understand. They don't see how you make it special. Natalia's throat tightens. She pulls him close, breathing in the familiar scent of graphite and baby shampoo. That's why we're going to show them, mi amor, starting with your room. She gestures to the shopping bags. Want to see the colors I picked? His eyes light up as she spreads the samples across his desk. Together, they talk about where each color will go, how they'll arrange his art supplies, what the space will feel like when it's done. It's nearly midnight before she finally gets him to bed, but his smile as he drifts off makes the exhaustion worth it. The next morning brings the harsh fluorescence of the courthouse, where Carlos's legal team works with mechanical precision to dismantle their lives. His lawyer, Miss Bradford, stands before the judge with a stack of papers that seem to glow under the artificial light. Your Honor, we have concerns about the admissibility of the minor child's artistic expressions as evidence. Miss Bradford's voice carries that particular tone of professional disdain that seems unique to expensive lawyers. These comic strips clearly show signs of coaching and manipulation by the mother. Natalia's hands clench in her lap as Miss Bradford holds up one of Mateo's drawings, the one of the crumbling ladder, each rung labeled with expectations. The sophisticated metaphorical content suggests adult influence. A 9-year-old child simply wouldn't conceive of such complex symbolic representation without prompting. David, Natalia's lawyer, rises quickly. Your Honor, if I may, we have testimony from Mateo's art teacher about his natural talent and creative development. These works are entirely his own, expressing his genuine feelings about the situation. The judge studies the drawing through wire-rimmed glasses. Miss Bradford, are you suggesting that Miss Cruz coached her son to create art that would paint Mr. Vargas in a negative light? We're suggesting, Your Honor, that Miss Cruz has created an environment where the child feels pressured to reject his father's values and lifestyle. Miss Bradford's heels click against the floor as she paces. Mr. Vargas only wants what's best for his son, the finest education, the best opportunities, a future secured by proper guidance and discipline. The word discipline echoes in the courtroom like a warning bell. Natalia thinks of Mateo's midnight drawing sessions, of the way he erases and redraws until his hands shake, trying to meet impossible standards. She thinks of the comic strips hidden under his bed, the ones too raw and honest to show anyone but her. Your Honor, David interjects, if Mr. Vargas is so concerned about Mateo's future, why has he consistently dismissed his son's obvious artistic talent? Why does he push for academic excellence while ignoring Mateo's emotional well-being? Before Ms. Bradford can respond, the courtroom doors open with a heavy creak. Carlos enters like he's walking into a board meeting, his suit perfectly pressed, his expression carved from marble. He takes his seat at the plaintiff's table, but not before casting a glance at Natalia that carries years of judgment in its weight. The judge clears her throat. I've reviewed the preliminary evidence, including the child's artwork and academic records. While Mr. Vargas's concerns about financial stability are noted, I'm more interested in the emotional environment of both households. She fixes Carlos with a steady look. Mr. Vargas, would you care to address the court regarding your son's artistic expressions? Carlos stands, buttoning his jacket with practiced ease. Your Honor, I support all forms of productive activity. However, I believe a child needs structure, discipline, and clear goals. He gestures dismissively at Mateo's drawings. These flights of fancy are fine as a hobby, but they shouldn't distract from real achievement. A murmur ripples through the courtroom. Natalia watches as Carlos's mask slips slightly, a flash of genuine frustration breaking through his polished veneer. She remembers that expression from their marriage, how it would appear whenever she questioned his methods or suggested a gentler approach. Real achievement, the judge repeats slowly. And how would you define that, Mr. Vargas? Academic excellence, leadership potential, the skills needed to succeed in the real world. Carlos's voice carries absolute certainty. I've built something from nothing, Your Honor. I know what it takes to rise above circumstances. Natalia. He pauses, and for a moment, something like regret crosses his features. Natalia coddles him. She lets him hide in these fantasies instead of facing reality. David stands again. Your Honor, we have evidence that Mr. Vargas's definition of reality has caused significant emotional distress to Mateo. The court-appointed psychologist's preliminary report indicates objection. Ms. Bradford's voice cuts through the air. The psychological evaluation isn't complete. Any preliminary findings are speculation at best. The judge holds up a hand. Overruled. I want to hear this. David produces a document from his worn briefcase. The psychologist notes, and I quote, "The child exhibits signs of anxiety and perfectionism consistent with excessive pressure to achieve. His artwork appears to be a healthy coping mechanism for processing these emotions." He pauses, letting the words settle. "In other words, Your Honor, these drawings aren't distractions, they're a cry for help." Carlos's facade cracks further. "This is ridiculous. I'm trying to prepare him for success, to give him advantages I never had. Natalia might be content with mediocrity, but I want more for my son." The word mediocrity lands like a slap. Natalia thinks of her extra shifts, of paint samples and furniture catalogs, of bedtime stories and midnight comforting sessions. She thinks of Mateo's smile when he shows her a new drawing, of his quiet determination to create beauty even when weighted down by expectations. The judge's gavel cracks through the tension. "We'll take a 15-minute recess. When we return, I want to hear from the child's teachers regarding his academic and artistic development." In the hallway, Natalia leans against the cool marble wall, letting it support her weight. David touches her arm gently. "You're doing well. Carlos is showing his true colors. Did you see how he reacted to the psychological report?" Before she can respond, she spots a familiar figure hurrying toward them. Ms. Rodriguez, Mateo's art teacher. The young woman clutches a portfolio to her chest, her expression determined despite her obvious nervousness. "I brought everything," Ms. Rodriguez says quietly. "All of Mateo's work from the beginning of the year. You can see his progression, how he uses art to express himself." She pulls out a series of drawings, laying them carefully on a nearby bench. "Look at the evolution of his style, the increasing complexity of his storytelling. This isn't just doodling. This is genuine talent developing under supportive conditions." Natalia studies the chronological display of her son's art, seeing what Ms. Rodriguez means. The earlier pieces show hesitation, uncertainty in the lines. But as the months progress, confidence emerges. Colors become bolder, stories more detailed, emotions more honestly expressed. "Thank you," she whispers, touching one of the drawings gently, "for seeing him, for understanding." Ms. Rodriguez straightens her shoulders. "I'll tell them exactly what I see in Mateo's work. How art isn't just an escape for him. It's a way to process his feelings, to make sense of his world." She glances toward the courtroom doors. "And how that world becomes smaller every time someone dismisses his passion as unimportant." The recess ends too quickly. Back in the courtroom, Carlos sits with his legal team, his expression once again carefully controlled. But Natalia notices the slight tension in his jaw, the way his fingers tap against the table, signs she learned to read during their marriage, warnings of the storm brewing beneath his practiced calm. Ms. Rodriguez takes the stand, her testimony painting a picture of Mateo that makes Natalia's heart swell with pride and ache with worry. She describes a thoughtful, talented child who uses art to navigate complex emotions, who creates stories about courage and perseverance, about standing up to dragons much bigger than himself. "And in your professional opinion," David asks, "how important is this creative outlet to Mateo's emotional well-being?" Ms. Rodriguez doesn't hesitate. Essential. His art isn't just about drawing. It's about processing his experiences, expressing his fears and hopes. When he feels overwhelmed by pressure or expectations, he channels those feelings into his stories instead of letting them consume him. Carlos's lawyer rises for cross-examination, her expensive perfume leaving a trail as she approaches the stand. "Ms. Rodriguez, wouldn't you agree that while artistic expression is charming, a child's future security depends more on practical skills, on academic achievement?" "No," Ms. Rodriguez replies firmly. "I wouldn't agree at all. Education isn't just about memorizing facts or achieving perfect scores. It's about developing the whole child, emotionally, creatively, intellectually." She gestures to the portfolio of Mateo's work. "These drawings show a child working to understand his world, to find his voice. Dismissing that voice could cause lasting harm." The cross-examination continues, but Natalia's attention is drawn to Carlos. His perfect posture has slipped slightly, his expression flickering between anger and something else, something that might be doubt or perhaps even recognition. She wonders if he sees himself in Mateo's struggles, in the pressure to meet impossible standards. The day ends with a small victory. The judge rules that Mateo's artwork will be admitted as evidence of his emotional state. But as Natalia gathers her things, she catches sight of Carlos in conversation with his legal team. Their heads are bent together, voices low but intense. She recognizes the set of his shoulders, the tension that radiates from him like heat from asphalt. They're planning something. In the hallway, David touches her arm gently. That was risky, speaking up like that. It needed to be said, Natalia replies, watching Carlos disappear into a conference room with his legal team. Not just for Mateo's sake. She thinks of her son's latest drawing of tiny plants breaking through concrete. Sometimes growth means cracking the hardest surfaces, letting light reach what's been buried for too long. Maybe that's true for fathers as well as sons. The afternoon sun slants through the courthouse windows, casting long shadows across the marble floor. Tomorrow will bring new battles, new challenges. But for now, Natalia holds on to the image of those persistent shoots breaking through concrete, of strength that comes not from hardness, but from the courage to grow, despite it. The alarm pierces the pre-dawn darkness like a needle through silk, muffled under the stack of court documents on Natalia's nightstand. She silences it with practiced efficiency, her movements careful and quiet in the small apartment where sound carries too easily. The papers can wait. Mateo can't. Her feet find the worn carpet, mind already mapping out the morning's choreography before the final hearing. Pancakes first, then Mateo's lunch, then the rush to get them both dressed and presentable before they need to leave for court. The routine is as familiar as breathing, each step measured against the steady tick of time slipping away. In the kitchen, Natalia spreads Mateo's comic strips across the table, the paper rustling beneath her trembling fingers. Each drawing tells a story beyond its simple lines. The recurring shield decorated with hearts, the knight who looks suspiciously like her, the dragon wearing her ex-husband's tailored suits. She traces the edges of a particularly powerful piece, Mateo's visualization of Carlos's expectations as a crumbling ladder, each rung labeled with impossible demands. The morning light creeps through the window, casting long shadows across the artwork. Natalia pulls out a fresh sheet of paper, her pen hovering over its blank surface as she considers her statement for the court. The words come slowly at first, then faster. Your Honor, I stand before you not just as Mateo's mother, but as his protector, his safe harbor, his first reader, and most loyal fan. When he draws his comics, I'm the one who watches his face light up with creativity. When he struggles with homework, I'm the one who sits beside him until he understands. When he's scared or upset, I'm the one he runs to for comfort. She pauses, remembering the way Mateo flinched at Carlos's voice during their last supervised visit. Her pen moves again, fiercer now. My ex-husband can offer Mateo material wealth, but I offer him something far more valuable, the freedom to be himself, to make mistakes, to learn and grow without the crushing weight of impossible expectations. In our home, love isn't conditional on performance. It simply is. A knock at the door startles her. Mr. Gonzalez, their elderly neighbor, stands in the hallway clutching a modest bouquet of wildflowers. Para suerte, he says, pressing them into her hands. His eyes, crinkled with concern, study her face. We're all praying for you, Natalia. Before she can respond, her phone buzzes with a text from Rosa Alvarez. Lighting a candle for you at Mass this morning. You've got this, Mama. Show them what real strength looks like. The support of her neighbors, this makeshift family they've built in their humble apartment building, wraps around her like a warm blanket. These are the things Carlos's lawyers can't photograph or quantify. The community that helps watch Mateo when she works late, the impromptu potluck dinners in the courtyard, the genuine care that flows through their building like lifeblood. Mateo emerges from his room already dressed in his best clothes, his hair carefully combed. He clutches his sketchbook to his chest like armor. Mommy? His voice wavers slightly. I made something for you. Natalia kneels before him, her court clothes crinkling. She takes his face in her hands, studying the features that are becoming sharper, more defined. Carlos's cheekbones, her determined chin, a unique blend of them both transformed into something entirely Mateo. Show me, mi amor. He opens the sketchbook to reveal a fresh drawing. A knight standing victorious over a fallen dragon, shield raised high. The knight wears her face, rendered with careful attention to detail. Above the scene, in his best handwriting, my mom, the bravest knight I know. Te amo, Mateo, she whispers, pulling him close. His arms wrap around her neck, still small enough to fit perfectly in her embrace. No matter what happens today, that will never change. You understand? He nods against her shoulder. I know, Mommy. That's why we're going to win. The courthouse looms before them, its marble steps already crowded with morning traffic. Natalia straightens her blazer, bought second-hand but carefully pressed, and takes Mateo's hand. They climb together, step by step, toward whatever verdict awaits them. Carlos arrives as they reach the top, his entrance precisely timed for maximum impact. His suit probably costs more than her annual salary, each crease and fold a testament to privilege. His lawyer matches his polished appearance, her heels clicking against marble with military precision. Natalia. His voice carries that familiar note of condescension masked as courtesy. You're looking well. His eyes flick over her outfit, cataloging every imperfection. Though I'm surprised you brought Mateo. These proceedings aren't really appropriate for children. Before Natalia can respond, David Martinez appears at her side. Her young lawyer's suit may be rumpled, but his spine is steel. Mr. Vargas, he greets Carlos, extending his hand. The court specifically requested Mateo's presence to establish a baseline understanding of the current family dynamic. The subtle emphasis on family doesn't escape Carlos's notice. His smile tightens at the corners. Of course. Shall we? The courtroom feels smaller than Natalia expected, more cramped than the dramatic spaces she's seen on TV. She sits beside David, their table a mirror of Carlos's more polished setup across the aisle. Mateo sits behind them with Sofia, who took the morning off work to provide support. Carlos's lawyer rises first, her movements as precise as a dancer's. Your Honor, our petition is quite straightforward. Mr. Vargas is seeking full custody of his son, Mateo, based on his superior ability to provide for the child's educational and material needs. She gestures to a stack of glossy photographs. As you can see from these images, the current living situation with Miss Cruz is inadequate. The photos appear on a screen. Their apartment buildings peeling paint, the narrow bedroom Mateo calls his art studio, the ancient car Natalia drives him to school in. Each image carefully framed to emphasize what's lacking rather than what's present. Mr. Vargas can offer Mateo enrollment at Westbrook Academy, the lawyer continues, naming a private school that costs more than Natalia makes in a year, along with private tutoring, cultural enrichment opportunities, and a stable environment conducive to academic excellence. David stands, his cheap suit looking even shabbier under the fluorescent lights. But his voice rings with conviction. Your Honor, what opposing counsel fails to mention is that Mateo is already excelling, both academically and artistically, under his mother's care. He holds up Mateo's latest report card, his art show ribbons, the glowing letters from his teachers. Miss Cruz has created a nurturing environment that supports both his education and his emotional well-being. The judge, an older woman with steel gray hair and alert eyes, studies both presentations carefully. I see a lot of discussion about material resources, she notes, her gaze moving between Carlos and Natalia. But I'm more interested in the child's emotional welfare. Mr. Martinez, you mentioned Mateo's artistic pursuits? Yes, Your Honor. David gestures to their evidence folders. Mateo has shown remarkable talent in visual arts, particularly in creating comic books and sequential art. Under Miss Cruz's encouragement, he's developed this skill into both a creative outlet and a potential career interest. Carlos's lawyer interjects smoothly. While creative hobbies are charming, Your Honor, Mr. Vargas is more concerned with providing a foundation for real success. The Vargas family has a legacy of business excellence. A legacy, David cuts in, that seems to prioritize status over emotional well-being. He pulls out Mateo's drawing of the crumbling ladder. This is how Mateo currently visualizes his relationship with his father's expectations. The judge studies the drawing for a long moment. I'm familiar with the psychological evaluation conducted last month, she says finally. Mr. Vargas, would you like to address the court? Carlos rises, his composure perfect, except for a slight tremor in his hands. Your Honor, everything I've done has been for Mateo's benefit. The world is competitive, demanding. I'm simply trying to prepare him for reality. By pushing him to the point of anxiety? David asks quietly. By dismissing his natural talents and interests? Objection, Your Honor. Carlos's lawyer starts, but Carlos waves her off. I want my son to succeed, he continues, but something in his voice wavers. To have opportunities I never had. My father. He stops, swallows hard. My father accepted nothing less than excellence. And how did that make you feel, Mr. Vargas? The question hangs in the air like smoke. Carlos's perfect facade cracks, just slightly. It made me strong, successful. Happy? The judge prompts. Carlos's silence fills the courtroom. Natalia rises slowly, her heart pounding. Your Honor, may I speak? The judge nods and Natalia takes a deep breath, thinking of all the nights she's held Mateo after nightmares about failing tests, about disappointing his father, about not being good enough. Carlos, she says softly, turning to face her ex-husband. I know you love Mateo. I know you want what's best for him. But love shouldn't come with conditions. Success shouldn't require sacrificing joy. She gestures to the comic strips spread across David's table. Look at these drawings. Really look at them. This is how our son sees the world, processes his feelings, expresses his creativity. And yes, maybe he won't become a CEO. Maybe he'll become an artist instead. But shouldn't his happiness matter more than living up to your father's ghost? Carlos flinches as if struck. For a moment, Natalia sees past his expensive suit and practiced poise to the scared little boy he must have been, desperately trying to earn his own father's approval. The judge's gavel cracks through the tension like lightning. I'm ready to render my decision, she announces. This court has reviewed extensive evidence regarding both parents' ability to provide for Mateo Cruz's physical, educational, and emotional needs. While Mr. Vargas can certainly offer superior financial resources, Ms. Cruz has demonstrated an exceptional ability to nurture Mateo's emotional well-being and creative development. Natalia's hand finds Sophia's, squeezing tight. Furthermore, the judge continues, the psychological evaluation raised serious concerns about the impact of Mr. Vargas's parenting style on Mateo's mental health. Therefore, I am granting full custody to Ms. Cruz, with Mr. Vargas to receive supervised visitation rights pending completion of court-mandated therapy sessions. The words echo in Natalia's ears like church bells. Full custody. They won. They actually won. Additionally, the judge adds, Mr. Vargas will continue to provide child support at the current level, with the addition of funding for Mateo's art classes and supplies. This court believes that supporting the child's natural interests and talents is as important as academic achievement. Carlos stands abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. For a moment, Natalia fears he'll object, fight the ruling with his army of lawyers. Instead, he turns to face the courtroom. His voice cracks. He clears his throat, tries again. I would like to apologize. To Mateo, primarily. His eyes find their son in the gallery. I've been so focused on making you successful that I forgot to let you be happy. I'm sorry, mijo. The admission seems to physically pain him, but he continues. And to Natalia, you've been a better parent than I gave you credit for. Better than I've been. He straightens his tie, a nervous gesture Natalia remembers from their marriage. I will comply with the court's orders regarding therapy. And he glances at Mateo's artwork again. Perhaps we could start by you showing me some of your comics? Outside the courthouse, reporters cluster like moths around Carlos as he makes a brief statement about personal growth and the importance of emotional intelligence in parenting. Natalia watches from a distance, Mateo's hand warm in hers, as her ex-husband publicly dismantles the facade he's maintained for so long. Their apartment building looks different when they return. Not shabbier in comparison to Carlos's mansion, but warmer, filled with the invisible richness of love and community. Their neighbors have gathered in the courtyard, Rosa's homemade cake centerpiece of an impromptu celebration. To Natalia, Mr. Gonzalez toasts, raising a paper cup of sparkling cider. Who showed us all what real strength looks like. Mateo tugs at her sleeve, eager to show his friends the comic strip he created during the judge's deliberation. The panel shows the knight and the dragon not in battle but in conversation, finding common ground under a bright sun. In the background, a small boy watches, smiling. Later, after the celebration winds down and the apartment grows quiet, Natalia tucks Mateo into bed. How are you feeling, mi amor? He considers the question with the same serious expression he uses when planning his comics. Good, he says finally. Sad for Dad, kind of. But happy we get to stay home. He looks up at her. Do you think he meant it about wanting to see my drawings? I think, Natalia answers carefully, that your father is finally learning some important lessons. And yes, I believe he meant it. She smooths his hair back from his forehead. Sometimes people need time to understand what really matters. Like love is more important than money? Exactly like that. Mateo yawns, snuggling deeper under his covers. I already knew that, he mumbles sleepily. You taught me. The words fill Natalia's chest with warmth as she turns out his light, leaving the door cracked, just how he likes it. In the quiet apartment, surrounded by evidence of their modest but love-filled life, she allows herself to fully feel the victory. Not just the legal win, but the deeper triumph. They've preserved something precious, something that can't be measured in dollar signs or status symbols. 6 months later, Natalia stands in the school auditorium watching Mateo accept first prize in the district art competition. His winning comic strip tells the story of a knight who discovers that true strength lies not in defeating dragons, but in understanding them. The judges praised its emotional depth and message of reconciliation. In the audience, Carlos applauds as loudly as anyone. His therapy sessions have softened some of his sharp edges, though he still struggles sometimes with his ingrained definitions of success. But he's trying. Last weekend, during his supervised visit, he and Mateo spent hours working on a comic together. Carlos's precise business drawings, a humorous contrast to Mateo's expressive style. After the ceremony, they walked together in the warm afternoon sun, Natalia and Mateo hand in hand, Carlos a respectful few steps behind. The distance between them is smaller than it used to be, but still necessary, still healing. Mateo chatters about his next artistic project, his voice bright with the confidence of a child who knows he is loved, unconditionally and completely. Natalia squeezes his hand, feeling the graphite smudges on his fingers. Some battles are worth any price, she thinks. Some victories can't be measured in courtroom decisions or bank accounts, but in the simple freedom of a boy's uninhibited smile, in the steady pulse of love that flows between a mother and child, strong as a shield, bright as hope itself. The end. Thank you so much for watching and listening to our story. Your time and support mean the world to us. If this video resonated with you, please share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear what you think. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring content. Your engagement helps us grow and continue sharing meaningful stories. See you in the next video.